Hello everyone, welcome back to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm Dave Lipscomb, Director of Strategic Communications at PBI. This week, in her last appearance on the Pro Bono Happy Hour before heading off to law school, PBI's Eva Richardson spoke with Ben Weinberg of Dentons. Ben talked to us about his career, offered tips for those interested in running a pro bono program at a major law firm, and shared some inspiring stories about his experiences as a pro bono lawyer. We hope you enjoyed the interview.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for joining us on the Pro Bono Happy Hour. We're really excited to be able to talk with you today.
Great. It's my pleasure.
So I'd like to start off by kind of discussing your role at Dentons. So you are the firm's pro bono partner, and on your website, the firm's described as a polycentric global law firm. So can you explain what this means and how this impacts your role as pro bono partner?
Sure. What that means is we don't have one headquarters. We are not a New York firm. We're not a London firm. We're not a Chicago firm. We're not a Beijing firm. The idea was, as we formed the firm, we wanted to be in and of the community in terms of our billable work, that we're not just sort of parachuting in to a country because the market is good. We're part of the country. And that's been very true about pro bono work. So it has given me and the firm the opportunity to do some very, very cool pro bono work all over the world because our lawyers, again, it's not like we have New York lawyers who are in our Riyadh office. They're Saudi lawyers, and they tend to be much more closely connected to the community, which means they're also more interested in doing pro bono work. So it's been very, that orientation of the firm is very helpful for me.
Great. And do you have different pro bono professionals in each office that help you oversee the program? Or
only in my dreams.
Oh, yeah.
We actually, we have, as of today, July 20, whatever it is, 26, something. I am the only full-time lawyer. We have some full-time professional staff, but we will be having another full-time lawyer in our Europe region as of Monday.
Oh, great. Nice. And I'm interested to hear about your personal journey as a public interest lawyer and how you came to have the job you have now.
Well, I will say at the outset, I didn't plan my career to have this job, but I planned my career to be a legal aid lawyer. So I went to Northeastern Law School in Boston to be a legal aid lawyer. I wanted to come back to Chicago and work at LAF, which is the LSC legal aid grantee in Chicago. And I was fortunate enough to be hired by LAF, and so that's all I wanted to do.
Right.
I wanted to represent individual low-income people. I was in the Englewood neighborhood office, very low-income South Side neighborhood, and I saw individual clients. It was fantastic. I did a lot of domestic violence. I did abuse and neglect, representing parents whose kids had been taken away wrongly. Loved it. And never planned to do anything else. I was going to spend the next 60 years there. And then we had our first child, or we were going to have our first child, and my wife, who's a clinical social worker, decided she was going to stay home with our child, and the one salary, LAF salary, was just not going to cut it. And I was starting to look around, and I got a chance to clerk for a judge on the Seventh Circuit, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, Judge William J. Bauer. And so I took a leave of absence from LAF and clerked. And then once I was done clerking, it was clear for salary reasons that I couldn't stay at LAF, and I ended up going to a law firm, which I never was going to do, had no interest in, and I was going to stay maybe a year just to see what it was like. And 7 years later, I'd been a partner for 2 years at Jenner & Block, which is, you know, if you look at the AmLaw pro bono rankings, most years is always at the top.
Yeah.
We did a ton of pro bono work. I did a death penalty case and a lot of other work with my old LAF friends. But I wanted, after 7 years, it was enough, and I wanted to go back to being a public interest lawyer. And we had a newly elected Attorney General in Illinois, Lisa Madigan, who was a progressive Democrat, first woman elected. And I took a flyer and left my equity partnership at Jenner & Block and joined her senior staff about 4 months after she had been elected, after she took office. And I was chief of the public interest division, which meant I was in charge of affirmative public interest litigation against tobacco companies and utility companies and on behalf of people with disabilities and civil rights work. And so it was fantastic. I loved it because I was a public interest lawyer with subpoena power, which is really fantastic. It was a very sort of logical outgrowth to my original legal aid work. We were doing the same, we were on behalf of the same people. It just, we had much more power and authority because we were doing it on behalf of all of the people. And so I did that and had great experiences. We really built the office. I did that for 5 years. And then out of the blue, I got a call from a friend at what Dentons was called then, which was Sun and Shine Nath and Rosenthal. And they told me they were looking for a pro bono partner. And I said, "What's that?" I had never heard of the position. I wasn't familiar yet. I mean, the Association of Pro Bono Counsel, ABCO, had just been formed, but I didn't know about the position. And they explained, and I interviewed, and fortunately I was hired. That was about 8 years ago, and I have been the pro bono partner ever since.
Wow, that's really fascinating. That's kind of been all over. In regards to your current job now, what are some of your favorite aspects, and what are some of your least favorite?
Well, my most, I think most favorite aspect of, or I guess you would actually say that my favorite aspect is leveraging our resources to do good. That can be sometimes on behalf of individual clients. We just did a clemency hearing on behalf of a woman who 26 years ago killed her abuser in self-defense, and she was represented at trial. There was an intern in the public defender's office who did the opening statement, and she was convicted of second-degree murder. It was an incredibly compelling story. Her life turned around after about 15 years in a really miraculous way. She's incredibly compelling, and just the sort of human interaction between our lawyers and her is what I really love, that when you really know you've helped someone, it's incredible. And so there's that, and at the same time there's also, we do a lot of impact work. So we finished recently a class action on behalf of prisoners with serious mental illness in Illinois, where we've really reformed how these people are treated, and before it was inhumane. And now, through our work, and we really were lead counsel, and I'm incredibly proud of that and thrilled to be involved. So that's my favorite part. My least favorite part is how inefficient the whole pro bono access to justice system is. And that it's a constant struggle to be effective because of how disorganized the whole system is. Having been in government, which is known as not necessarily the most efficient way to allocate resources necessarily, it was way more efficient and effective and organized than sort of the private charitable system that we have for giving access to justice. So that's incredibly frustrating for me.
And what is your kind of favorite moment as a lawyer throughout your whole career, if you had to pick one?
I know exactly what it is. Well, I had two favorite moments. My small favorite moment was when I represented a woman who had applied to live in the Robert Taylor homes. Robert Taylor homes was one of the worst public housing, gigantic developments that was in Chicago. Chicago in the late 50s and early 60s built these monstrously huge housing developments and then just warehoused poor people in them, and they were a disaster for all sorts of reasons. She wanted to move in, and she was rejected. And I remember this was when it was a pro bono case, but it came from my old friends at LAF, and they were sort of, as a legal aid lawyer, you're confronted with all sorts of misery every day, but this one was particularly bizarre because this was a place that people were desperate to leave, yet she wanted to live there and had been rejected. So they asked me to take on this appeal, and I represented her at the appeal. And I was still pretty young at the time. I probably was still in my 20s. And it went very well. We had figured out some sort of legal theory that gave her relief and, prepared her and all. And as we were leaving, I sort of turned to her and said, I thought that went very well, and she burst into tears. And now what I would do, I would just hug her, because now I'm older and more confident and all, and I was sort of didn't know what to do. Right. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, that's the 7th time I had an appeal hearing for this, and that was the first time they treated me like a human being.
Oh, wow.
And that's because I was there as her lawyer. So my favorite moment as a lawyer was when I helped someone else feel more like a human being and forced the government to treat her like a human being. I mean, it's outrageous that there are people who are not treated like a human being. She wasn't, and through my fairly meager legal skills, she was.
Right.
And I've held on to that moment ever since.
Oh, that's really inspirational. Yeah. And you said you have a bigger story as well.
Well, my bigger one was when I was in the Illinois Attorney General's office. I was asked to lead this effort about utility rates in Illinois, which were going to skyrocket for a long, complicated reason. And we had this great lawyer in our office who created a strategy, and I was sort of just sometimes the face of that. But we sued and pursued the utility companies all over federal court and state court and administrative hearings and all. And finally we had the come to Jesus meeting where they said, all right, we give up. What do you need to settle? And I got to look at the CEO of a very large utility company and say that on behalf of the people of the state of Illinois, we were going to need a $4 billion refund.
Oh, wow.
And he swore at us and walked out and all. And that night we finished drafting a windfall profits tax that would have cost his corporate parent about $800 million a year. The next morning we got it out of committee, and it was going to the House floor for a vote. He denounced us as Stalinists in a press conference, and we ultimately settled for a $1 billion refund, where they paid to the 12 million ratepayers in Illinois. And so that was a thrill.
Yeah.
It was a thrill. That was a huge impact. It was a thrill just because I had to practice to say the $4 billion without seeming like Dr. Evil. But that was a huge moment. So that's a favorite, but not nearly as much as the helping someone to feel like a human being.
Yeah. Wow, yeah. So moving on, you are also the current president of the Association of Pro Bono Counsel, which you mentioned. So can you talk about the organization, what it does, and its role in the community?
Sure. So ABCO was formed about 10 years ago by pro bono counsel at 5 different firms. Angela Vahil from Baker McKenzie, Maureen Alger from Cooley, Amanda Smith from Morgan Lewis, Sarah Lynn Cohen from Sherman and Sterling, and Greg McConnell from Winston & Strawn. And at the time, there were less than 50 people working full time running their pro bono programs, and it was still a very new position in the legal world. And the idea was that sort of 2 things. One was just sort of professional development. Like, people had these roles. It was a very new job, and we needed to support each other to learn how to do the job better. And that has worked out very well. I mean, 10 years later, we have upwards of 175 members at over 100 firms in the U.S., the U.K., and Australia. But the other thing that has happened and has taken on even more significance is that we collaborate on pro bono and access to justice. So we know, as the full-time counsel, partner, directors, we have many different titles, but essentially we're all pro bono counsel. We know how pro bono works within firms. We know how it works within our firms. And what we've been doing more and more is collaborating to really drive pro bono in a direction that is more effective and has more impact and helps the community more. And I find that thrilling. As I said before, my least favorite aspect of my job is the sort of horrible inefficiency of the system. And ABCO is working to make it work better. So, for example, one of the issues, whenever there's a legal crisis, lawyers at law firms and firm leaders and management want the firms to get involved. So that could be something like Guantanamo, or it could be a natural disaster like Superstorm Sandy, or it could be the Middle East refugees. And one of the challenges is that if we don't collaborate, we're all pro bono counsel running around having conversations with legal aid executive directors or PBI or whoever, trying to figure out what to do. And instead, what ABCO does is we serve the function of we get together and discuss what we can do. So we're not all reinventing the wheel. Yeah. We're not all being individual charitable actors. We're being a system, and that's really thrilling. And so, for example, on our ABCO board meeting this week, we're actually discussing police violence and race. We're cataloging opportunities that our members can get involved in, and that's really fantastic because that brings the pro bono system. It helps to bring it closer to something that can fairly be called a system, not just a bunch of well-minded people running around doing charitable works.
Yeah. Does it take a lot of meeting to do that?
It does. The reality is we are ABCO, though we have 9 or 10 projects around the country, which are active legal aid, collaborative legal aid projects, pro bono projects where firms are collaborating. We put out a newsletter. We have multi-day conferences for our members. We don't have paid staff.
Right.
So it does take a great deal of work. We have an executive committee made up of 5 and then a board of 15. We meet weekly, and it does take a lot of time, but it's totally worth it because, first of all, it's a great group of people. I like to think the Pro Bono Council attracts, very public interest-minded, very high-quality lawyers and good people. And so it's a very good group of people to work with. But it's just thrilling to be able to collaborate to move the system forward.
So in the firm's release for its 2015 Global Social Impact Report, you have the following quote. You say, corporate social responsibility is an intrinsic part of Dentons' positive and forward-thinking culture. Our pro bono work not only contributes to our professional development and our lawyers and other professionals' desire to make a lasting and positive impact on their communities, but also reinforces our entrepreneurial approach to solving problems in today's complex world. So can you kind of explain this a little further and what this means?
Sure. So that's trying to touch on sort of a number of different things, but the biggest part, so the entrepreneurial part of it, why that's significant for us, again, goes back to our polycentrism, which is that the firm doesn't decide what pro bono work we're going to do because we're in and of the community. So what may be important to our Warsaw office may not be important to our Amman office or our Chicago office. And so the idea is we want things to be created organically and entrepreneurial. We want our lawyers to be able to think, what do I care about? What am I interested in? And then we want them to figure out how to get involved. We're not like, I sort of thought when I started this job or before I started this job that I was going to kind of be the assignment person, that I would find out about opportunities and I would just assign people. Right. Oh, you're interested in pro bono work? Here's something for you to do. And I quickly realized that's not how my firm operates. My firm operates on the principle that our lawyers figure out what they want to do. Yeah. And so there's also obviously there's tremendous benefits, sort of professional development benefits to doing pro bono work and all that. But the reality is what that refers to is our focus on letting our people develop what they want to develop where they are.
And how do you go about kind of gauging where interest lies and what
gauging where interest lies?
Do you have like outreach to the attorneys, or?
Yes, we do. So we have a sort of a web of different committees. We have a U.S. pro bono committee. We have a global pro bono committee that has 2 members from each region of our firm, and our region. So I think literally no one would be involved. No one would be interested in hearing a lot of the details about the Swiss Verein corporate structure. But essentially, we have sort of a parent board, and underneath it are subsidiaries. And the subsidiaries are regions. So we have the U.S. region, we have the Europe region, we have the U.K. region, we have the Canada region. So each of those has their own pro bono structure, and then we have a global one overlaying that. And that's part of the purpose also of our global social impact report that captures things that we're doing, pro bono work that we're doing, community service work that we're doing in all of our regions. And the idea is you want to have as many people as you can with their sort of ear to the ground, figuring out what people want to do in the regions.
Yeah, definitely. And in some other reading I was doing, I also saw a place where you say that the heart of Dentons' global social impact program is this question of how can we help? So can you elaborate on what this means and how you assess social impact?
Yeah, so it's sort of the flip side of we want our people to figure out what to do. We also realize that we're not going to know often. Right. That I work in the Willis Tower, the Sears Tower in Chicago. Low-income people don't walk into the Sears Tower looking for lawyers. Right. We rely on legal aid organizations, and in Europe and across the globe, we rely on NGOs that have identified a need. So what we do, if we're interested in an issue, we don't ask our lawyers, who are very busy doing billable work, we don't say, oh, you're interested in an issue? All right, now go figure it out. Go figure out all the nuances and figure out what an effective strategy would be to address that issue. Instead, what we do is, find out what are you interested in, and then go find the NGO, go find the legal aid organization, go find the advocacy organization that's involved in that issue, and then we say, how can we help?
How does the firm go about kind of measuring social impact and assessing the impact that it's
having?
Well,
measuring social impact is a huge challenge. As I go around to the PBI conference or Equal Justice conference or various access to justice conferences, the PILNET conference in Europe, things like that, there's always a discussion about how to measure impact. And there isn't an especially good measure yet. Law firms obviously measure involvement by hours, and that obviously doesn't address impact. Essentially what we do is, we're always looking to have more impact. But really, again, what we do is we rely on our legal aid, NGO, nonprofit partners. Are they coming back to us and asking us to do more? Right? If they don't, we know that we probably were not all that helpful. Right? It wasn't worth it. They're all under-resourced and underfunded. They need to be savvy about who to work with. So when we have our partners come back to us and say, your amicus brief in the Seventh Circuit abortion case, we wrote an amicus brief on behalf of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. It was very effective. It was quoted by Judge Posner several times in his majority opinion. All right, now we're looking for amicus briefs in the United States Supreme Court for the Texas case. So when they come to us based on our earlier work, we know we're having a major impact because they exist solely to advance an issue on behalf of their community. Right. So LGBT issues. For example, we just hired Evan Wolfson, who is the sort of the father of the marriage equality movement, and he's going to be working part-time with the firm. And again, if we weren't having a meaningful impact, he wouldn't do that. Right. Because that's what he cares most about. And so we rely on sort of feedback. I'd love to say that we had a much more systematic way of getting feedback from all of our clients or all the legal aid organizations. The reality is we don't. There are firms that do a much better job of that, of measuring and all. The reality is that we don't, because we haven't devoted the resources to it. I don't know that it would materially affect that much.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the reasons why the position of pro bono counsel exists, which is to have a sort of point of contact for the firm so that NGOs and nonprofits and legal aid organizations know who to reach out to to make sure that the clients are being served. Mm-hmm. So it's not exactly no news is good news, but I would never claim that we have a fully robust scientific way of measuring our impact.
Mm-hmm. So in an article you wrote about, it was about encouraging law firm leaders to support pro bono work. You said there are essentially two basic types of strategy that pro bono partners can use to kind of encourage collaboration with management. And so one is the heart approach and the other is the head/wallet approach. So can you explain these two strategies, how they're used, and how the firm uses them? Yeah.
So it's good this isn't a the confirmation hearing for a Supreme Court justice. So my thinking has evolved a little bit on this point. I still believe, there are different ways of looking at sort of how to motivate or how you explain to management why pro bono is important. And it tends to go in sort of waves and fads. Right. There was, originally there was just sort of, pro bono, there's a need out there, and there's sort of an ethical obligation of us lawyers. We're the keepers of the justice system. We're the only ones who can appear in court on behalf of someone else, and if there are people who can't afford lawyers, we should provide them. And that's sort of the heart. It's the ethical obligation, all that. Well, it turns out that doesn't necessarily move everyone, and so then came the development of the business case. The business case for pro bono. And part of the business case, which is obviously, I was thinking very much that's the head wallet. Part of the business case is the professional development of especially associates, right? Because as time has gone on, paying clients are less willing to pay for junior associates to be trained, since when they come from law school, they don't know very much about how to be a lawyer. In the good old days, those clients would just pay the bills that had these first-year associates on the matters essentially just being trained. Clients don't want to do that anymore. So it's a challenge to get practical experience for junior associates. So pro bono can provide, as long as it's well supervised, can provide those opportunities. That's great. Pro bono is, very good usually for the firm's branding. Firms like to be branded as being involved in the community and advancing pro bono. But it turns out, it's also described it's very good for morale and recruiting. But it turns out that the heart is a much bigger piece of it, and the reason we know that is because. And we think the heart is a bigger piece of it, and that focusing on that will engender support from firm management for the following reasons. So most of us who run around and are very involved in pro bono usually say, well, we know why people do pro bono. Certain associates want to get training, some people strongly. There's all these different sort of rationales. But Jennifer Kronman and Brenna Devaney, who are pro bono counsel at Clear Gottlieb and Skadden, decided, you know what? I'm going to do a survey and ask our associates why they do pro bono work and why they don't.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It's really? Well. And it turns out and now this has been replicated at a few other firms. This used the survey, and it's produced roughly the same results. There's sort of 12 different choices about why associates do pro bono work. The number one answer, and the answer that gets around 65%, which is a very large number when you have 12 choices, is that doing pro bono work makes me feel good as a lawyer.
Wow.
That's
fascinating. Yeah.
So it makes people feel good, and when they feel good, they're more productive and happier, and they stay in their jobs, because attrition is a huge problem at law firms. So pro bono work feels good, and it makes our lawyers happy to be lawyers. There's not a lot there in the world that makes people happy to be lawyers, because you get so much grief and jokes and They're not; those jokes are never about lawyers doing pro bono work, obviously, and they're not about public interest lawyers. but pro bono makes them feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very important. That's very important information. And actually, that amateur scientific research that Brenna Devaney was leading is now actually turning into a full-blown academic study of this.
Oh, nice.
With an academic group that is looking at that issue. So now we know a little more about what motivates associates.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, if I were to rewrite that article, I would talk about this more, because having data about that moves firm leadership, I think, in more of a way than just talking about professional development or just talking about helping associates meet certain competencies. To find out really sort of what is the core value for associates is very important.
Mm-hmm. So another kind of similarly related struggle can be getting partners to do more pro bono. And I've heard that you have a good story about getting a partner who hadn't done much, if any, pro bono work involved. It's your hell is frozen over story. So I was wondering if you could share that. Sure.
So not long after I started, and part of what I have to do is just meeting people. Mm-hmm. And so 8 years after I started, we merged, 7.5 years, we merged with a firm called McKenna, Long & Aldridge in the U.S. And much of this year is traveling to these new offices and meeting our lawyers, mm-hmm. finding out what they like to do, how are they involved in the community and all. So shortly after I started in Chicago, I was meeting everyone and talking to associates. And there were several associates who were very enthusiastic about pro bono work, but they said they weren't doing any because the senior partner who they worked for, they were part of a team, didn't do any pro bono work and didn't support it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I sort of looked into the situation. It turns out that partner billed about 2,600 hours every year.
Oh, wow.
She had 3 kids. She was very involved in her family. She's crazy busy.
Yeah.
And also had a book of business of like $5 to $10 million.
Oh, wow.
So she's important to the firm, and I knew the firm was not going to suggest to her that she should go somewhere else if she didn't do pro bono work.
Mm-hmm.
But I went and talked to her, and I said, listen. I said all of that. I said, listen, my understanding is the firm's never going to say boo about you not doing pro bono work because you bill a zillion hours and you make a lot of money for the firm, mm-hmm. and you're devoted to your family, and God bless you. But there are these associates who work for you who would like to do pro bono work, and they think you don't want them to do pro bono work. She said, well, that's not true. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of billable work to do, but if they want to also do pro bono work, they should. So she then sent them an email that said the subject was hell has frozen over. And it was hell has frozen over. I'm going to do pro bono work, and you should too. And that the first thing she did was actually election protection work in the 2008 election.
Oh, nice.
Which, not surprisingly, was very popular in Chicago.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And since then, she's developed a real pro bono docket.
Oh, wow.
There's a settlement project in Chicago that's run by the federal court through for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and lawyers can be appointed for the limited purpose of negotiating settlements. Mm-hmm. And it's very helpful because pro se or unrepresented prisoners, for example, have no ability to negotiate a settlement with the government.
Right.
She loves those cases. She's won awards for them. She's now on the board of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. She's an active member of the board. And the associates, all of those associates, some of whom are now partner, do pro bono work.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so that gave me that, and that story has been very effective because when there are partners who say, look, I'm very busy. I billed 2,100 hours last year. I was like, well, that is very busy, but just so you know,
right.
Donna Vabornik billed a lot more, mm-hmm. and she does pro bono work.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, that's such a great story.
Yeah.
Just goes to show, yeah. So this is a question we get asked a lot, and I'm sure you do too. But what advice do you have for those who want a job running a pro bono program at a major law firm?
So I do get that question a lot. I get it less than I used to because I used to be willing to talk to anyone who wanted to ask about it. And so the main advice. So I remember someone asking me, as a junior lawyer who was a friend of associate, I think, at the firm. He said, like, "Oh, I hate being a lawyer, but I'd love to do what you do." And I thought in my head, "You're disqualified. you shouldn't do this, and you will have no hope of doing this." Because I think to be in one of these positions, you have to really love practicing law.
Yeah.
Because we touch a bazillion different kinds of matters and cases. You have to be interested in that. And I think you have to be really dedicated to pro bono or access to justice.
Yeah, definitely.
You have to really, to do this job well, you have to be valuable to your firm. So if you think of, like, when the firm was interviewing me and several other people, they obviously like that I'm chatty, but they liked my connections and involvement in the legal aid world. Obviously, I had deep relationships in Chicago, and then I had government relationships as well. So what I would tell people is, do really well in law school, and pick what you want to do. You could be, there's many routes to this job. The majority of ABCO members who are lawyers were associates at their own firm.
Okay.
And then were eventually hired after they became partner, after they left and came back, whatever, as pro bono counsel. That's the majority. But there are plenty of people who were legal aid lawyers, who were public interest lawyers. The guy we're hiring as our pro bono director in Europe has been the sort of program director at a large NGO in Europe, a clearinghouse for pro bono. So, but you have to really be, you have to love what you're doing and be very good at it. And then try to have a combination of public interest and law firm work. Because then you'll be really valuable to your law firm.
Right.
And you'll have credibility with the people, because these people are really busy, the lawyers at our firm. And so the pro bono counsel needs to be hip to that and needs to be sensitive to it. And so if you've been an associate or partner in a law firm, that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? But you also need to really know the legal aid world, because that's helpful.
Kind of related, so I'm asking this partially in self-interest since I'm about to go to law school, but what advice do you have for new law students?
Do you really want to be a lawyer? And then, it used to be that there are plenty of bright people who, the first advice is do really well in college. Take a good LSAT prep course and do really well in your LSAT, because you can get into a better law school, which will position you to have more opportunity and more choice about what you're going to do. It used to be, though, that it was sort of a law degree was sort of a fallback. I don't know what I want to do. I'm either going to go to law school or business school.
Yeah.
And the reason that was okay, especially if you had done really well in college and had gone to a very good college, is that you could get a job after law school and then figure out what you want to do. Maybe you'd figure out you want to do that. But in this day and age, that's much less true. So what I say is, be sure you want to be a lawyer. You may not know what kind of lawyer you want to be, but be sure you really want to be a lawyer, because this is hard work. It's really hard work. And if you're not sure you want to be a lawyer, you're not going to really want to do that hard work, and then you're not going to succeed, and then that's going to be miserable. But I love being a lawyer, so I think law school is a blast.
Great. Well, thank you for that. That's helpful for myself and
Sure.
for many others out there.
Excellent.
So to wrap things up, I have two somewhat more quirky questions for you. One is, who is your pro bono role model and why?
I have who I wanted to be when I grew up, and that was Thurgood Marshall. And he was an incredible role model, although it turns out when I became a lawyer, I didn't want to do exactly that kind of work. And, of course, he had already done that kind of work. So my role model then became some of the lawyers at LAF who had started in the neighborhood and then had moved on and made huge impacts. And then one of my role models was my mentor at my law firm, Jenner & Block, David Bradford, who is literally the nicest, kindest professional person I've ever met. And hugely successful, but also did a ton of really important pro bono work. And then in my law firm, my role models I go two ways. One is we have senior partners, a guy named Jerry Wolf, who's in our Kansas City office, and Harold Hirschman in Chicago. They have both had magnificently successful legal careers. Very high-performing, very well compensated. And they're both, Jerry's in his 70s, and I think Harold is getting there. And they now devote upwards of 1,000 hours every year to pro bono work.
Wow. Jerry
has his second death penalty case in the last 10 years that he's working on. He also has a docket of Vietnam-era disability cases for veterans because he was in the service during Vietnam. Harold Hirschman is the lead counsel on our prison reform case, representing a class of prisoners with serious mental illness. At the same time, he has also a docket of individual cases on behalf of prisoners. So I love that idea in a law firm where you can be hugely successful, always do pro bono work throughout your career, but then as you get closer to the end of your career in the law firm, there is space for you to do this tremendous work. So that's one. The other role model I will say is some of our junior associates who in many ways have the worst job at a law firm. As they say, blank flows downhill. You get the least responsibility on matters, and it's you have to sort of spend several years before you start getting substantial responsibility. And they work really hard. And so we had two associates, Gail Eisenberg and Christine Schonbacher, last year, who we were trying to, my colleagues and I in Chicago, pro bono counsel colleagues, were trying to cut into a backlog of asylum cases that needed to be distributed to law firms from the National Immigrant Justice Center. And Christine and Gail volunteered. It was last year, in fact, right around now, when I circulated some very beautiful, compelling requests that they take in these asylum cases. They agreed to take one, and Christine called me and she said, we're talking about, I said, oh, well, by the way, when's the hearing? She said, oh, it's in September. And I said, all right, so you have plenty of time. She said, what do you mean you have plenty of time? It's in September of 2015. And I said, do you have a lot of time right now? She said, no, we're busy, but we're going to do this. And they represented this transgendered woman from Mexico. And they had, for them, my story about helping someone feel like a human being, they had that experience for their legal careers because they went to the hearing. They did a magnificent job of preparing it, and there's a great litigation partner who was supervising them. They went to the hearing, and our client really needed a translator. Sometimes people for whom English is a second language can do without a translator, or can't. She did not speak English. And so the hearing was tough, but it went well. And at the end of the hearing, the judge granted asylum. But because of the translation need, they knew before their client knew that she had won. So they got that sort of looking at each other and, squealing with delight, and then got to pivot and look at their client as the translator informed her that she was not going to have to go home to Mexico and face violence and death, and was going to get to stay in the United States. And she, of course, burst into tears of joy and relief, and then came and hugged Gail and Christine.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They're my role models because they're the people who I need and, to succeed. They inspire me because they're so busy and they're young. They don't know what they know yet. They don't know what they want to do with their lives and careers exactly, but they're willing to, work ridiculously long hours and dive into something and save a woman's life. And that's fantastic.
That's amazing. Great. Well, thank you for sharing those.
That was a lot.
No, the more the better. And if you had to finish up, if you had a magic wand, what one thing would you change about access to justice?
So I have the magic wand, and I only get to change something about access to justice. I would wave my magic wand and fully fund legal services.
Mm-hmm.
I would increase it. I don't know if it's 10-fold or 100-fold, but that's what I would do.
Yeah.
And then I do lots of other stuff. And I was just talking to someone playing the game of like, if you could have any superpower, what would you have? So,
yeah.
But if I had my access to justice wand, I would make much better funding for legal services.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, Ben, thank you so much for talking with me today.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure to hear about all your varied experiences as a lawyer and what your firm does. It's really amazing.
Thanks again for listening to our interview with Ben Weinberg. We thank Ben for sharing his stories and expertise with us. To listen to more podcasts, visit www.probonoinst.org/podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Pro Bono Happy Hour on iTunes or YouTube. And please take a moment to leave a review. We'd appreciate the feedback, and it would help make it easier for other listeners to find the program and help us expand the conversation about pro bono and access to justice. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time on the Pro Bono Happy Hour.